researchers believe they've located the leading cause of death when it comes to mummies.
At that time, in ancient Egypt, 3,500 years ago, a meteorite falling on Earth.
3D imaging technicians scanned 2 mummies and took over 50,000 images.
Scientists sequenced the DNA of 2 7,000-year-old mummies found beneath the Sahara Desert. And the results didn't just surprise them. The genomes belonged to a ghost population that had survived in total genetic isolation for 50,000 years, completely cut off from every civilization around them, while the rest of humanity mixed, migrated, and evolved. And that was only the first thing the DNA revealed, buried in the sand. The Takori rock shelter sits in southwestern Libya in a landscape that looks like the end of the world. Barren rock, endless dunes, reachable only by 4-wheel drive. Nothing lives here now, nothing grows. The heat alone could kill you. But 7,000 years ago, this was a savanna. Between roughly 14,500 and 5,000 years ago, the entire Sahara went through what geologists call the African humid period, a climatic shift so extreme it turned the world's largest desert into a green, lake-studded landscape teeming with wildlife. Rivers carved through the terrain. Permanent lakes filled basins that are now bone-dry dust bowls. People settled along the water, built shelters, raised animals, and formed communities that lasted for generations upon generations across thousands of years.
Napoleon got to do with Egypt and the Sphinx. Well, in fact, Napoleon led an invasion of Egypt in 1798.
Takori was one of those settlements. In 2003, Professor Savino Di Lernia of Sapienza University of Rome began excavating the site. On the second day, his team scratched through the sand and hit a jawbone, then skin, then ligaments still connecting bone to bone after 7,000 years in the ground. 2 of the 15 individuals buried at the shelter had naturally mummified in the dry desert air, their tissues preserved across 7 millennia in a way that almost never happens in hot environments. "We started with these 2 because they are very well preserved," Di Lernia said. "The skin, ligaments, tissues. These weren't pharaohs sealed in golden tombs with the resources of an empire behind their preservation. These were shepherdesses, preserved by pure geological accident, surrounded by evidence of continuous human occupation, stretching back more than 8,000 years. And get this, the site told a story of people who weren't passing through. They'd been living in this exact spot for thousands of years, generation after generation, raising livestock and burying their dead in the same rock shelter where they'd raised their children. They built a civilization inside a world that no longer exists. The question was simple. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And how did they end up here, in the middle of what would become the most inhospitable desert on Earth? The answer turned out to be anything but simple. The impossible extraction. Here's the thing about ancient DNA in hot deserts. It doesn't survive. Heat destroys genetic material at the molecular level. The brutal temperature swings of the Sahara, scorching days, freezing nights, shatter DNA into fragments too small to read. Every previous attempt to pull usable genomes from North African remains in comparable conditions had failed. Every single one. Labs around the world had tried and walked away empty-handed. The heat was simply too destructive. Most researchers in the field considered it flatly impossible. Archaeogeneticist Nada Salem and her team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology didn't accept that. They drilled into the mummy's teeth and leg bones, the densest structures in the human body, the last place genetic material holds on in degraded remains, and extracted enough surviving fragments to assemble 2 complete genome sequences. First time in the history of the field that anyone had pulled whole genomes from remains found in this kind of punishing environment. A technical achievement that opened a door nobody in the field had been able to reach before, and one that would change the story of human ancestry forever. Johannes Krause, senior author of the study and director at the Max Planck Institute, called it what it was. These samples come from some of the oldest mummies in the world. That we could sequence their entire genomes is a small miracle. Then they ran the comparison. They stacked the Takori genomes against 795 present-day and 117 ancient genomes from across Africa, Southwestern Asia, and Europe, the largest dataset ever assembled for a study like this. The goal was straightforward. Find out where these two women fit on the human family tree. Determine which modern and ancient populations they were related to, and trace their ancestry back through the millennia.
The end of the last ice age, circa 10,000 BC, I am convinced.
When Krauss saw what came back, he said something no geneticist says lightly. If someone had shown him these genomes without context, he would have believed they were 40,000 years old. The results didn't just surprise the team, they broke the tree. 0%. The Takori women carried no sub-Saharan African ancestry. 0. Not a trace, not a fragment, not a statistical whisper. The number was absolute. Nothing. This makes no sense on paper. During the African humid period, the Sahara was a continuous green corridor. Open grasslands and navigable waterways connecting North Africa to the populations south of the desert with no barrier in between. Every model of human interaction says these groups should have been in constant contact, migrating back and forth, trading goods and ideas, interbreeding freely. That's what populations do when there's nothing separating them. But these two women's DNA says none of that ever happened to their lineage, not once in tens of thousands of years. Their ancestors had remained completely cut off from sub-Saharan African populations for an almost incomprehensible span of time. Genetically isolated inside the very landscape that appeared, from the outside, to have been the most connected period of their existence. The Green Sahara wasn't a bridge for this population. It was an island. Self-imposed genetic fortress surrounded by an open, connected world that they participated in culturally, but never joined biologically. And here's the catch. When researchers searched for the closest known relatives of these women, they didn't find them anywhere nearby. Not in Chad, not in Niger, not in the Nile Valley. The Takori mummies matched most closely with 15,000-year-old hunter-gatherers from Tafaralt Cave in Morocco, a population that predated the Green Sahara entirely, had no geographic overlap with Takori, and shared with these women a deep genetic signature found nowhere else on Earth. Both groups trace back to an ancient North African lineage completely unrelated to any sub-Saharan population ever studied. A lineage that had apparently persisted along the northern edge of the continent for tens of thousands of years, invisible to modern science until this moment. If you're watching this and realizing how much of what we thought we knew about human, migration just collapsed. Subscribe to Vault of Discovery. We're giving you the real science that rewrites the textbooks, and we do it every single week. Hit subscribe now, because the next revelation in this story is even bigger than what you've heard so far. The 50,000-year ghost. The team pushed the comparison even further. And this is where the story goes from strange to almost unbelievable. They ran the Takori genomes against one of the oldest known populations of modern humans ever found outside Africa. 50,000-year-old individuals from Zlatý Kun in the Czech Republic. These were among the very first Homo sapiens to walk out of Africa and into Eurasia at the dawn of human expansion, the original out-of-Africa migrants. The Takori women were more closely related to them than to any sub-Saharan African population alive today. Two shepherdesses buried in Libya 7,000 years ago carry DNA linking them directly to the first wave of modern humans who left Africa. 50,000 years ago, their ancestors walked out at the dawn of human expansion across the globe, and then either turned back or never left the northern edge of the continent, and then they stayed, genetically untouched, for 50,000 years. While every other branch of humanity that left Africa kept moving, kept mixing, kept changing, this one didn't. The rest of humanity spent those 50 millennia spreading across every continent, building civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley to Mesoamerica, developing thousands of languages, mixing and merging and diverging in every conceivable direction. This population did none of that. They stayed in North Africa, genetically frozen, maintaining their original identity while the entire world transformed around them, and humanity reinvented itself 1,000 times over. An ancient lineage sealed in the Sahara like a living time capsule that nobody knew existed. But scientists had suspected something was out there. For years, faint genetic echoes had been showing up in the DNA of modern North Africans. Traces that didn't match any known population, ancient or modern. Unexplained fragments that haunted population models without ever resolving into anything concrete. No one could explain where they came from or what population they pointed to. researchers gave this invisible group a name before they ever found a single body. They called it a ghost population, a human lineage whose existence could only be inferred from shadows buried in the genomes of living people, like footprints left by someone who had vanished without a trace. Now, the ghosts had faces, 2 shepherdesses in a Libyan rock shelter. Our research challenges previous assumptions about North African population history, said Nada Salem, and highlights the existence of a deeply rooted and long isolated genetic lineage. This discovery reveals how pastoralism spread across the Green Sahara, likely through cultural exchange rather than large-scale migration. Ideas travel, genes don't. But here's the thing. If genetic isolation was all these women represented, the story would already be extraordinary. But they weren't living in a cultural vacuum, far from it. They were pastoralists. They herded sheep, goats, and cattle. They made and used pottery. They ran a functioning agricultural community inside the Green Sahara at a time when animal domestication was the cutting-edge technology reshaping the ancient world. They had everything their neighbors had, except their neighbors' DNA. For decades, the scientific consensus held that pastoralism spread from the Near East, where sheep and goats were first domesticated, through physical waves of migration. Herders moved outward, carrying their animals, their knowledge, and their genes into new territories, absorbing or replacing whoever they found along the way. That was the model. Migration drives civilization. People carry ideas because people move. The Takori DNA destroyed that model. Their genomes carry no Near Eastern farmer ancestry, no Levantine signatures, no European agricultural lineages, not a single genetic marker from any of the population movements that conventional models required to explain how herding reached the Sahara. Yet they were clearly herding at a sophisticated level. Their site was full of pottery sourced from sub-Saharan Africa and the Nile Valley, proof of active trade networks spanning enormous distances across the continent. We know now that they were isolated in terms of genetics, but not in cultural terms, Dilernia explained. There are a lot of networks that we know from several parts of the continent because we have pottery coming from sub-Saharan Africa. We have pottery coming from the Nile Valley. They traded actively. They interacted constantly with their neighbors. They adopted tools, techniques, and technologies from every civilization that passed through their territory. But they did not interbreed with any of them, not once, for thousands of years. Through constant sustained contact at shared watering holes, grazing grounds, and trade gatherings where ideas changed hands freely. Their tools, pottery, and even herding methods were adopted from outsiders, Krauss explained. But there was little intermarriage. They're like living fossils, clinging to their ancestral root until the Sahara dried up. Knowledge flowed freely across the Green Sahara. Genes did not. Civilization spread without a single migrant carrying it. The entire model of how human societies adopt new technologies, through migration, replacement, and interbreeding, has to be reconsidered in light of what 2 shepherdesses' DNA made undeniable: a molecular timestamp. Buried in the genome data was a timestamp, not a date scratched into pottery or carved into stone. A biological clock encoded at the molecular level, ticking silently inside these women's DNA for 50,000 years, and it pinpointed the exact moment their ancestors crossed paths with another species of human. The Takori mummies carried Neanderthal DNA, about 0.15% of their total genome. That number is tiny, roughly 1/10 of the 1.5 to 2% that every modern human with Eurasian ancestry carries in their cells today. But it's significantly larger than what shows up in most sub-Saharan African populations. And it tells a very specific, very precise story about when and where their ancestors made first contact. Their ancestors met Neanderthals, or people who had just bred with Neanderthals, during the first great wave of human migration out of Africa, roughly 50,000 years ago. That encounter left a genetic fingerprint in their cells. Then this lineage split off from the outward moving wave, returned to North Africa, or never left the continent's edge, and went into deep isolation. They never went through the later, more intensive rounds of Neanderthal. Interbreeding that happened as human populations pushed deeper into Europe and Central Asia, where Neanderthal groups were more numerous. They carried only the earliest, faintest trace of that first contact. and nothing more was ever added to it. For 50,000 years, that trace sat frozen in their cells, never diluted by further mixing, never amplified by additional encounters. A pristine molecular record of the moment our species first crossed paths with another kind of human being, preserved intact, while every other population on Earth had their Neanderthal signature rewritten by subsequent waves of contact and interbreeding. Harold Ringbauer, group leader of archaeogenetics at the Max Planck Institute, noted that this level of genetic isolation over such a vast time scale was extraordinary and essentially without parallel in the study of ancient humans. In Europe, constant population mixing over thousands of years erased any comparable genetic continuity long ago. No ancient European, Asian, or sub-Saharan African lineage maintained this kind of unbroken thread across 50 millennia. The Takori population was unique. It's like a cultural island, Krauss said. They absorbed ideas but kept their bloodline pure. Death by desert. The Takori ghost population didn't fall to conquest. No army swept through. No plague broke them. No rival tribe drove them out. The desert did it, slowly, silently, over centuries. When the African humid period ended, aridification crept across the continent and dismantled everything this population had built. Lakes evaporated, rivers vanished underground. Grasslands that had sustained vast herds of cattle, sheep, and wild game turned to lifeless dunes. The entire ecosystem that had made pastoralism, trade, and isolated community life possible collapsed, year by year, century by century, generation by generation, until nothing remained. The Green Sahara became the Dead Sahara, and everything it had, sheltered for millennia, died with it, or was forced to move. The genetic boundaries the Takori people had maintained for millennia became impossible to hold when the land itself could no longer support a separate community. As water sources disappeared and grazing land turned to sand, they were finally absorbed into the broader North African populations they had traded with, but never merged with for thousands of years. After 50,000 years of genetic isolation, the desert itself forced the merger. That contact, trade, and proximity never could. Their DNA didn't disappear entirely. It left faint traces in modern North Africans, subtle echoes that puzzled geneticists for years before anyone understood what they were seeing. The whole genome carries the DNA for many of your ancestors, said Ringbauer. As you go along the genome, you start seeing the different trees of your ancestors. One genome carries the stories of many. What's still buried? The Sahara Desert covers, an area the size of the United States. Researchers believe its rock shelters and buried cave systems hide dozens more naturally mummified populations from the Green Sahara era, each one potentially carrying genetic data that could reveal entirely new branches of the human family tree that modern science has never seen. Louise Humphrey, a research leader at the Natural History Museum's Center for Human Evolution, Research in London, who was not involved in the study, confirmed what the findings mean for the broader field. DNA extracted from two pastoralist women who were buried at the rock shelter around 7,000 years ago reveals that most of their ancestry can be traced to a previously unknown ancient North African genetic lineage, she stated. Future research integrating archaeological and genomic evidence is likely to yield further insights into human migrations and cultural change in this region. As sequencing technology advances and desert archaeology pushes deeper into Libya, Algeria, Chad, and Niger, the ghost population of Takori may turn out to be only the first of many lost lineages hiding beneath the sand. Every new mummy found, every genome sequenced, threatens to rewrite the story of who we are and how we got here all over again. The human family tree isn't finished. The Sahara has been holding entire branches we didn't know existed, and Takori was just the first one to surface. But for now, the story belongs to two shepherdesses who died in a green world that no longer exists. They raised animals, traded pottery, and lived full human lives inside a landscape that the desert would eventually erase completely. They lay forgotten beneath the sand for 7,000 years. And when science finally reached them, when the right team drilled into their teeth and read the code that had been waiting in silence since the Sahara was alive, they changed everything we thought we knew about human history. Two women, one rock shelter, and a genetic story 50,000 years in the making. If this discovery reshaped how you think about the human story, subscribe to Vault of Discovery and share this with someone who needs to see it. We bring you the science that changes everything, every single week. The Sahara isn't done talking, and neither are we.